guys, Miss Momo here. And before I start off this episode, I want to say I had a little bit of a gap where I accidentally restarted the game. So I went through and I caught all the same Pokemon again, and I'll show them off right now. So I've been training them. You could see one of them actually evolved. So we have Earnhardt the Pidgey, we have Washington the Bulbasaur, Timmy the Mankey, Coston the Pikachu, Theodora the Kakuna, Benedict the Rattata, and that's it. So, as I said before, all these names have historic people in them. Now, today's topic we're going to be talking about is the Dark Ages. And the reason why I want to talk about the Dark Ages is because it's really a lot of fun. So this is going to be from 1600 to about 1500. And if you've never heard of the Dark Ages, it's actually a really interesting time in European history because this is where we get a lot of the reforms. This is where we see a lot of the new movements coming out. So let's first start off with who's the big empire of the time. And it's the Byzantine or Byzantine Empire, not Bismol. Don't ever say Bismol because it's like Pepto-Bismol, and that's not what the empire is called. It had established Christianity as its main religion, and the Byzantine Empire took form after the fall of Rome. Rome fell in 476. By the way, if you're taking world history, that's one of your anchor dates, so 476. And between 634 AD and 650 AD, the Byzantine army will lose its power to the Arab army, which will send shockwaves through the world, as it's supposed to be the protector between the Arabs and the European societies. Now, the origins of the Byzantine Empire can be traced back to 330 AD, and when Rome's Emperor Constantine I declares it the new Rome, this is the beginning of the end for the Roman Empire itself. So that's where the Byzantine Empire comes from, and Constantinople will be stormed by the Ottomans under Constantine XI's rule. Now, a schism is something you hear a lot in European history. A schism is just simply this. It is the breaking of religion by different views. Now, the first schism we talk about in world history is the one in 1054, which is caused in Constantinople, and this is a breaking up of the Latin Church, or the Roman Catholic Church, and the Orthodox Church. So this is where you get the Russian and the Greek Orthodox out of this schism in 1054. And the schism is only partially mended today. It's still really a tense issue when it comes to these two churches. Now, what's really interesting about the Byzantine Empire is its social structure. At first, the empire was sheltered because of its great economy, but population loss and economic depreciation and loss of goods and revenue caused the Byzantine Empire to really fall. It actually controlled the trade of purple cloth, and back then purple cloth was a sign of royalty. So if you were wearing purple in any way, that meant you were somehow royal and meant you were more important in the society. So they controlled that, and there was 3 levels of society in the Byzantine Empire: upper class, middle class, and lower class, with their people having their own skills. And of course, the emperor is going to be on top. You're not going to have anybody who's going to outrank the emperor or the empress. So their levels of society kind of mimic what we see today with upper, lower, and middle class. Now, your place in the society is actually determined by your birth. So you can't marry up. It's always by birth until one of the emperors will change that. And they did have slaves, but they were able to earn their freedom by either working for so many years or by battling for their masters, kind of like the Roman gladiators could, which, if you don't know, Roman gladiators could earn their freedom after so many wins in the gladiatorial combat, which is pretty interesting to me. Now, I'm gonna have weird pauses. I'm sorry. I'm not good at recording and playing at the same time because I kind of get lost in my own thought. Now, what rights did you have as a citizen? Well, there's 12 laws that would protect you from cruel punishment, and 5 of the 12 laws deal with property and ownership of property and how to protect yourself against somebody committing a crime against your property. Say somebody broke into your house and attacked your family, then it dictates what you can and cannot do to that person. Now, the plague of Justinian occurs between 541 and 542. It's actually named after one of the emperors. His name is Justinian, who ruled during this time. It's similar to the bubonic plague of the 6th century. The first record of this plague actually hitting is in Egypt in 541. And the plague quickly spreads, and the number of deaths is unclear, and it would hit the ancient world again in another 225 years, finally disappearing in 750. Now, the plague arrives in Constantinople in around 542 and almost a year after the first disease outbreak, it pretty much cripples the empire. And it sweeps through all the Mediterranean states. And since the biggest trader was many of these Mediterranean states, it imported the disease in a way, which is kind of scary if you think about it. Back then, they had no idea what caused the diseases, so they tried to come up with different reasons. And one of the reasons is the Empress Justinian marries a dancer named Theodora, hence the name for the Kakuna, and they blame the plague on her, but it actually was probably caused by rats. Now, because of the rat problem they have, they're going to claim that the plague more than likely came from God being angry at them for letting their emperor marry a dancer, because her profession was not very well accepted by the upper class. Now, women of the Byzantine Empire did have social standings, and status could be transmitted between female or male lines depending on it. So if you're an aristocrat, for example, and your mother's surname holds greater prestige than your father's surname, you would actually take on your mother's surname instead of your father, because your mother's more important than your father, which is pretty interesting if you think about it, because this is like something that you won't normally hear in the ancient world. Guys, tell me if you'd rather me record after the fact, because this is the first one I'm actually recording live, or if you like me having these weird pauses because I have to drink or I have to look at the paper as I speak. Dang it, poison. So we're gonna move on to medieval early Europe, 600 to about 1000. Now, as I said before, Rome falls in 476. And it falls for several different reasons, main reason being that Rome had become corrupted and unstable. And of course, you have the famous line from Julius Caesar, from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, beware the Ides of March. And by the way, the Ides of March are actually March 15th, 44 BCE. So BCE and AC is, BCE is before Christ and AC is after Christ. That's just how we split up time as historians. So you have the early Middle Ages, which is the decline of Western Roman Empire, and then you have the High Middle Ages, which is from 1001 to 1300. High Middle Ages is where you start to see the classics, antiquity, falling into disrepair and disuse because nobody uses them anymore, because who has time to study ancient Roman texts if you're trying to survive and your village has a bubonic plague? So this is a time where we kind of know it as the Dark Ages. And it's a population decrease, a decrease in urban centers, and a decrease in trade and immigration, labeled as the Dark Ages, as I said. And this is all caused by the fall of Rome. Now, medieval technology, you start to see better fortifications, metal weapons, stirrups, chainmail. Heavy horses is what the armor that you see on knights' horses a lot of times. That's what they're talking about with heavy metal or heavy horses. Siege warfare and a battering ram. Now, you have a pretty interesting lineage that I really do like to talk about, just because of who they are, and that is the Frankish kings. The Frankish means French, so these are the early French kings. And this is a line that we are going to see somebody who will unite Europe come from. They will actually turn into the Carolingian Empire. The Franks were actually a group of dukes who came together and realized that they needed to unite to throw off the Roman Gauls as well as the Visigoths, but the Visigoths will conquer them in 507. Now, the son Clovis, he is one of the most interesting figures out of the Frankish kings because he will bring Europe together. He's going to be the first of these pagan leaders to actually declare himself a Christian and then force everybody else to become a Christian along with him. Now, with the Frankish kings, you also have Pepin, ruled from 750 to 768. He is known as Pepin the Younger or Pepin the Shorter. He is the first in a very long line of Carolingian kings who will take over Europe and start to reform it. Now, his most important child, honestly, is his son Charlemagne. Born April 2nd, 1742, dies January 28th, 1814. And the reason why I say he's so important is because, well, you have to understand, during this time, people believed that if you got the blessing of the church, that you were actually kind of chosen by God. And Pepin did get the blessing of the church. He became a close ally of the papacy, and the papacy kind of used him like he used them. Now, his son Charlemagne will be christened the Holy Roman Emperor. He's going to be the first of the Holy Roman Emperors, and he's probably one of the most successful. Now, we also start to see the threat of Vikings. Vikings are going to come from Scandinavia. They're going to start attacking England and other places along the coast. And this threat starts to come about in about 793. They had dragon-like warships that they would ride in on, and they would actually now settle in Greenland around the 800s or 900s, ending most of the raids because what they were looking for was land, and they found Greenland and Iceland, and then they decided, hey, these are nice places to settle. You also have, during this time period, the manorial system, where you have a lord and you are working the land for the lord and you're not owning your own land, and this is all to appease the lord. And you have the manor house, and then the people working the land, they're known as serfs. Now, let's get into England. I love English history, so let's get into England. Now, we have William the Conqueror. Now, at age 8, William becomes the Duke of Normandy, which is actually in France. And if you know where Normandy is, it's on the coast pretty much. Well, he becomes the Duke at age 8. He's actually not a legitimate child. He was a child born out of wedlock. And a lot of people would challenge his birthright to become the Duke. But he ends up beating them all back. Now, he's also cousins with the King of England, who will actually promise him the throne on his deathbed. Now, his name is Edward, and William is promised the throne because William is actually related to Edward. And on Edward's deathbed, he tells Harold Godwin that William's the next King of England. You must get word to him. But Harold decides, you know what? I'm going to become King of England. I'm not going to give this position to William. He's French. I'm British. Why would I do that? And William gets really, really upset at this and decides to raise an invasion force. And he does. And in 1066, William will take over England after defeating and killing Harold at the Battle of Hastings, where William will claim the throne of the British Empire. Well, I'll still call it British Empire. Now, there's also something really interesting that William does. It's called the Doomsday Book, written in 1085 on William's orders. It's actually a record of everything that's going on in England, like how many cows there are, how many chickens there are, how many people are living there, what people are selling, and nothing is hidden from him. So he knows everything that's going on. It's just really funny, though, in my opinion, that it's called the Doomsday Book. Now, because of that, he knows everything that's going on, and a lot of people don't really like that, but at the same time, he starts to modernize Britain, and Britain starts to come into the European power. Before I forget to mention, do I have his death date on here? No, I don't. So, William actually is going to be the king who brings Normandy as a part of the English throne, and it's going to be a two-throne until somebody loses it. And I'm not going to ruin that surprise because that should come up. Now, the role for women in medieval era is kind of vague in a way because they are a fixture of the manorial system and they were actually kind of property in a way, but there are some women who will actually do important acts, ranging from, of course, Joan of Arc, who's probably one of the more famous ones, to Heidi of Willoughby, which it's kind of interesting. And you also have Eleanor of Aquitaine, who's one of the most wealthiest women. She is born either in 1122 or 1124 and dies April 1st, 1204, and she was married to the King of France and then the King of England. Now, what could women do during this time? They could own land. Some noble women would run their own lands when their husbands were away at war, but no noble woman will work alongside her husband in any task. So women would also sew, and one of the most famous tapestries was made by all women. It is known as the Beilix tapestry. It is 230 feet long, 20 inches wide, and it actually depicts William the Conqueror invading England in 1066. Now, you have the Holy Roman Empire, who's going to start to be formed December of 1800 by Pope Leo III, who will crown Charlemagne as the first Holy Roman Emperor, and he's doing this to make sure Christianity is actually spread. Now, with the fact that he wants Christianity spread, he's going to want to convert people. And what do most people do when they want to convert people? Well, they force them into their belief system by saying either you do this or die, and it does work. Now, the Holy Roman Empire is going to be a very long-standing surviving empire. And it's pretty interesting to look at. Now, let's face Barack. So let's go on to some other topics that I kind of want to go more in depth to. Now, the first one I want to do, Vine Whip, is going to be one of the popes. His name is Pope Innocent III. He reigned as pope from 1198 to 1216. Pope Innocent is one of the most powerful and influential popes of his time, claiming over all European kings superiority of religion, saying that he had the ability to actually challenge, and this is what's going to cause the schism, which will divide the Orthodox Church from the Latin Church, because they don't want to give in to what the Pope is saying over in Constantinople. Now, you have the Knights Templar that are formed in 1118, which are officially endorsed by the Catholic Church in 1129, and they were actually the ones who were sent off to fight in the Crusades, are the ones who go after the Muslims, trying to gain back the Holy Land and what is lost. And there's several Crusades. There's like 5 of them. But rumors are going to start spreading, and King Philip IV of France doesn't really like the Templars. He really distrusts them, and he will start putting pressure on the church. But before that, in 1307, he will give out an order to arrest all Templars, and he will finally gain his wish to have them fully dismantled when he convinces Pope Clement V to disband the order in 1312. Now, let's move on to the conquest of Scotland. So in 1174, we're going to have King William the Lion of Scotland, acknowledge King Henry II of England, as is saying that King Henry II of England serves the King of Scotland. So King William will say to King Henry, "You are my servant." And how do you think the King of England reacts to that? Not very well at all. He gets really upset and decides, you know what, I'm going to invade Scotland and I'm going to try and find the king. Now, the hostilities will begin in April at the Count of Flanders. And when Henry hears about this, he's going to go right back from where he's at. He's going to go up to Scotland, and he's going to try and invade July 18th, 1174. And he is also going to be attacked for the death of Thomas Becket, which is another issue in itself, where Thomas Becket speaks out against what the king's doing, and the king doesn't really like it. So in the end, the king's going to invade, and once he invades, he is going to take over a large part of Scotland and kind of make this now kind of subservient for a while, and then Scotland breaks free, and it's a whole struggle that continues to go on all the time. Now, when I say Scotland and England fight all the time, they actually do during this time period. But moving on to another anchor date, 1255. Guys, if you're taking world history, 1255 is one of your major anchor dates. Now, this actually is the date the Magna Carta is signed by King John of England. Magna Carta is also known as the Great Charter. Now, if any of you have ever watched Robin Hood, I forgot it for a second, you'll know that King John is actually the brother of King Richard the Lionheart, who will die in 1199, giving John the throne. And a lot of people don't like John because John will do what he wants. He doesn't listen to British tradition. He has an affair with a French princess, and he disdains his mother, who is Eleanor of Aquitaine. And he will also quarrel with the Pope for a very long period of time. He'll raise taxes, he'll steal land from people, and when the barons get tired of this, they will raise an army and march against him, forcing King John to sign the Magna Carta June 15th, 1255 at Runnymede. Now, the Magna Carta itself has a preamble and 63 clauses. However, in later renditions of this document, the clauses are going to be reduced to 39. And it says that you can't raise taxes, you can't steal land, and you can't attack people just because you're the king. This will also lead to the English right of petitions passed in 1628 and the Habeas Corpus Act passed in 1679. Now, Magna Carta, John really doesn't follow, but at the same time, it's there to protect the lords, and they feel like they've actually done something to protect themselves. Now, moving on, we have the War of the Roses, 1455 to 1487. Now, this starts off with a struggle between the House of York and the House of Lancaster, the House of York being the white roses and the House of Lancaster being the red roses. And it's a family struggle over who's going to be the next king of England. Now, both families have the right to claim because they descend through Edward III's sons. And Edward III was actually king from 1327 to 1377. And when the first Lancaster king, Henry IV, comes to the throne in 1399, there was a lot of political struggle, and his son Henry V won many victories against France during the 100 Years' War, which is also going on during this time, so this is where Joan of Arc is. But it doesn't lead to a lot of happiness. Now, Henry V is going to marry an ambitious woman named Margaret of Anjou, who will want to control the crown completely. She'll start attacking Richard of York, who is one of his closest cousins and one of his advisors. And originally, it was just settled that the Yorks would be the advisors and the Lancasters would rule, but it got really heated because Margaret wanted them all gone. She wanted to make sure her son was on the throne, but there was a lot of issues with the two of them. And if you guys have ever watched the TV series Game of Thrones is actually loosely based off the War of the Roses. Now, the War of the Roses actually is going to be ended by Henry Tudor, who will come in and overthrow both the Lancaster and the Yorks, ending the war, combining the red and white rose to create the red-white rose of the Tudor dynasty. And he will actually come in and the war take over, become king, and we all know one of his children, which is, of course, Henry V. If you guys don't know who Henry V is, I'll make a video talking about him because he's pretty interesting for the British kings. Now, the 100 Years' War, as I mentioned in the War of the Roses, this is a war between France and England. It's the longest conflict that pitted kings and kingdoms against each other, lasting from 1337 to 1453. And it's actually not a straight 100 years. There's actually some breaks in between it, but it is still called the 100 Years' War. Now, the English army is going to have to march into France. They're going to start fighting the French. And at first, the English are totally winning. And then you have the incident where you start to see them start losing. And it's really confusing to the English. Why? Well, they accuse one of the women. Her name is Joan of Arc, meaning she is from the town Arc. And she claims that God gave her voices saying that she was going to save France, and she had to do it a certain way. And, well, she ends up getting burned at the stake, being accused of being a witch because there's going to be a underhanded deal done against her. Now, to end the War of the Roses, there's two treaties. You have the Treaty of Tours, which is signed in 420, and you also have the first peace, which was signed in 1360. There's actually no official title to that first treaty, but the Treaty of Tours ends the War of the Roses because the English were winning up until about 1429, and that's when Joan of Arc comes into play. And when she comes into play, she changes the whole field because people are going to start following her. They're going to start believing, and she turns it around at the Siege of Orleans. Now, other world events going on during this time period, we have the Medici family in 1434 rise to power in Florence. They are one of the most influential families of bankers that come out of this time. And if you've ever played Assassin's Creed, you should recognize that name. You have John Gutenberg inventing the printing press. And printing the Bible. You have Christopher Columbus reaching the New World in 1492. You have the Treaty of Tortales, which was signed in 1493, splitting the world in half between the Spanish Empire and the Portuguese Empire, saying that one half of the world belonged to them and the other half belonged to the other because they didn't want people to fight over what territory they got. You also have the Spanish Inquisition. Now, the Spanish Inquisition is where they start going around hunting down people who are Jewish, who are not Catholic, who are Muslim, and they're trying to get rid of them, kick them out of Spain itself. And because of this, a lot of these people will end up losing their lives. This is where we see a lot of torture methods come out during this time as well. And that happens from 1492 to about 1501. It's actually lasts even longer in some cases, they claim. But the last person to actually die from the Spanish Inquisition, if I'm remembering right, was actually a teacher who refused to teach religion in their classroom. So that's the end of the Spanish Inquisition and the end of the Dark Ages. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys give me some suggestions for the next video I do. And tell me, guys, do you like me recording live, or do you like me actually recording after I've recorded, just because it's a little bit cleaner? I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.